Ethan Ward had lived on his ranch for as long as he could remember. The land stretched wide around him like an endless ocean of golden grass, rolling hills, and quiet winds that carried the scent of earth. It was a peaceful place. The kind of place people dreamed of when they wanted to escape the noise of the world. But for Ethan, the peace was mixed with a heavy kind of silence. The kind that stayed with him no matter where he went. Every morning, long before the sun rose, Ethan woke up to the sound of his old wooden clock ticking on the wall. He would sit on the edge of his bed for a moment, rubbing his tired eyes, and remind himself to move. The days felt the same, and routines were the only thing that kept him going. He slipped into his boots, pulled on his faded jacket, and stepped outside into the cool morning air. The sky would still be dark, painted with stars that slowly faded as the sun began to rise. Ethan liked those early moments because they were calm and quiet, and the world felt untouched. He walked to the barn, listened to the sounds of his animals waking up, and fed them while talking to them softly. They were the closest thing to company he had. He didn't mind it. Animals never hurt anyone, and they always stayed loyal. His horse, Maple, nudged him gently every morning as if reminding him that he wasn't truly alone. Ethan smiled at her simple affection. He saddled her up and rode across the ranch, checking fences, counting cattle, and making sure everything was in place. It was a simple life. But after the loss he had experienced, simplicity was all he could handle. 3 years had passed since his wife, Lena, had died, but the memory still hung around him like a shadow. She had been the light of his life, the voice that filled the house, and the one who made the ranch feel like a home instead of just land. Losing her had broken something inside him. The locals tried to help in the beginning, bringing food or offering company, but Ethan slowly withdrew. He didn't push people away with anger. He just didn't know how to let anyone in anymore. His house told the story of his loneliness. There were 2 chairs at the table, but only one was ever used. Her books still sat neatly on the shelf, untouched. The garden she had planted remained outside, now cared for in silence. Ethan kept it alive, not because he liked gardening, but because he couldn't let go of the things she loved. Every night, he cooked the same simple meals, ate alone, and washed dishes with mechanical movements. Sometimes he talked to Lena, even though he knew she wouldn't answer. He wasn't losing his mind, he just missed having someone who listened. He missed the warmth of another voice. Despite his quiet nature, Ethan was respected by the townspeople. Whenever he rode into town for supplies, people greeted him kindly. They knew what he had gone through, and they admired the strength he showed in continuing life alone. The children liked him too. Even though he rarely smiled, he had a gentle way of speaking that made them feel calm. But Ethan didn't stay in town long. He bought what he needed, exchanged polite words, and returned to his ranch before the sun went down. The world outside felt too busy, too loud. His heart wasn't ready for that noise. One evening, near the end of autumn, something changed. It began like any other day. Ethan had finished feeding the animals, repaired a fence on the east side, and was riding back home as the sun lowered behind the hills. The sky glowed orange. The wind was cool, and Maple walked steadily beneath him. As they rode near the old forest boundary, a place not many people visited, Ethan noticed something unusual. The ground had fresh footprints that didn't belong to him or anyone he knew. They were small, too small to be a grown man's. The trees nearby had broken branches, as if someone had pushed through in a hurry. Ethan slowed Maple down and studied the signs carefully. He didn't jump to conclusions. People sometimes wandered onto his land by accident. Maybe a hiker got lost or a child had been exploring. But something about these footprints felt different. They seemed rushed, uneven, like someone was running or struggling. Ethan followed them a little farther, not too deep into the forest, just enough to observe. The footprints suddenly disappeared near a muddy patch, and the silence around him grew heavier. He heard only the wind moving through the trees and the soft breaths of his horse. He shook his head and decided not to worry too much. Maybe it was just someone passing through. Still, a small knot formed in his chest. It had been years since anything unexpected happened on his ranch. Most days were predictable, uneventful, calm. But this felt like a sign that something was shifting. The next morning, the feeling returned. Ethan tried to ignore it as he worked, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the footprints. He didn't like mysteries, especially not on his land. The ranch was the one place he could control, the one place where life felt steady. Unexpected signs made him uneasy. Later that afternoon, while checking the fence near the same forest line, Ethan felt the presence of something or someone watching him. Not in a frightening way, but enough to make him pause and look around. The trees swayed gently. The branches rustled. But he saw no one. Still, he couldn't shake the sense that someone was out there. That night, the sky turned cloudy, and the wind picked up speed. The ranch house creaked softly as the weather shifted. Ethan sat by the window with a cup of tea, staring out at the darkness. The memory of the footprints returned. He wondered if he should set lanterns outside or check the forest again. But he reminded himself not to overthink. Nature could be strange sometimes, and he didn't want to create fears that weren't real. Yet the feeling didn't leave him. The next morning, he rode out earlier than usual. The air was crisp, and the ground was still wet from the night's light drizzle. As he reached the abandoned shed at the far end of his property, a small wooden structure he rarely visited, something caught his attention. The door was slightly open. He frowned. He always kept it shut. It wasn't locked or important, but he never left it half open. Carefully, he approached the shed, listening for any sound. Maple stopped behind him, ears twitching as if sensing something too. Ethan stepped closer, the wooden floor creaking beneath his boots. Inside was darkness, dust, and old tools he hadn't touched in years. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the shed was no longer empty. He waited, listening, but heard nothing except the breeze passing through the cracks. He left the shed but continued to feel uneasy the rest of the day. His mind kept circling back to the same strange signs, the footprints, the broken branches, the open door. Something unusual was happening, something he couldn't yet understand, and though Ethan didn't know it then, his quiet, lonely life was about to change completely. The land he thought he knew so well was about to reveal a truth he never expected. Soon, he would discover something that would shake the silence he had lived in for years, and lead him toward a girl whose first words would bring back the name of the woman he still loved. The next morning began quietly, but Ethan felt a strange tension in the air as he stepped outside. The sky was cloudy, the kind of gray that made the world feel heavier than usual. He fed the animals as always, but his mind kept returning to the footprints and the shed door. He tried to push the thoughts away, yet something deep inside urged him not to ignore the signs. By afternoon, he finally decided to check the far side of his land again. He saddled Maple and rode toward the old shed, feeling a mix of curiosity and concern. As he approached, the wind picked up, brushing through the tall grass and making the old boards of the shed groan softly. This time, the shed door was closed, but Ethan knew he hadn't touched it since the day before. He slid off Maple and walked slowly toward the shed, his steps careful and quiet. He paused at the door, listening. At first, he heard nothing, only the steady rhythm of his heartbeat and the wind pushing against the walls. But then, something changed. A soft sound reached his ears so faint it almost blended with the breeze. It wasn't an animal sound. It wasn't the creak of wood. It was a small sob. Ethan froze. He held his breath and listened again. The sound came once more, clearer now, someone crying softly, like they were trying hard not to be heard. Ethan pushed the door open gently. The hinges squeaked, and the room inside remained dim. Dust floated in the air, and the familiar smell of old wood and forgotten tools filled the space. But something new had been added to that smell, a sharpness, something like fear. At first, he didn't see anything unusual. The crates were in the same places, the tools covered in cobwebs, and the old tarp lay folded in the corner. But when he stepped inside, he heard the sound again, coming from behind a stack of wooden crates. He slowed his steps, trying not to frighten whoever was hiding. "It's okay," he said gently, his voice soft but steady. "I won't hurt you." The crying stopped. Silence filled the shed. Ethan moved slowly toward the crates. When he reached them, he crouched down and gently pushed one aside. His breath caught in his throat. A young girl sat curled up in the corner. Her knees were pulled tightly to her chest, her hair messy and falling over her face. Her clothes were torn, and she looked weak, as if she hadn't eaten properly in a long time. What caught Ethan's attention most was the metal chain around her ankle, fastened to a heavy hook in the wall. Ethan's heart tightened painfully. He had not expected to find someone, especially not a child, in such a condition. The girl stared at him with frightened eyes, her whole body trembling. She didn't speak, but he could see she was terrified of him. "It's all right," Ethan said softly, raising his hands slightly to show he meant no harm. "I'm not here to scare you. I just want to help." The girl pressed herself tighter against the wall, her small fingers gripping the chain as if it offered protection. Ethan didn't move closer. He knew sudden movements would only add to her fear. "What's your name?" he asked gently. The girl didn't answer. She only looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. Her lips trembled, and she tried to shrink even more into the shadows. Ethan's mind raced. Who was she? How long had she been here? And who would chain a child in a place like this? He kept his voice calm. "Did someone bring you here? You can tell me. It's okay." The girl shook her head weakly, not to deny but because she was too scared to speak. Ethan took a slow breath. He needed to earn her trust. "I'm Ethan," he said softly. "I live here. This is my ranch. I didn't know you were here, but I'm glad I found you." She blinked but said nothing. Ethan gently examined the chain from a distance. It wasn't locked with a padlock. It was tied with a heavy knot. Probably meant to keep her from running. He didn't want to touch it yet. He didn't want her to think he was going to hurt her. Instead, he tried again to speak. "Are you hurt? Do you need water?" He opened his bag and slowly pulled out a water bottle. He placed it on the ground a few feet away and pushed it toward her. The girl's eyes followed the bottle. Her lips were dry, and he could see she was thirsty. After a long pause, she reached out cautiously and took it. She sipped the water, but her hands shook so much Ethan could see her fear plainly. "Good," he said softly. "You're safe now." The girl looked at him with hesitation, her voice barely a whisper as she tried to speak. At first, no words came out. Then she swallowed hard and tried again. "Alina." Ethan felt his entire world stop for a moment. The name hit him like a sudden wind, sharp, unexpected, impossible. His wife's name. He stared at the girl, confused, shocked, but trying not to show it on his face. "What did you say?" The girl's lips trembled again. She looked terrified to repeat it, but she whispered the word once more. "Alina." Ethan's mind flooded with questions. How could this girl know that name? His wife had been gone for 3 years, and they had lived a quiet life. No strangers came to the ranch back then. No one had any reason to use Lena's name with a frightened child. Where did you hear that name?" he asked carefully, trying to keep his voice gentle. The girl shook her head, unable to speak more. Tears streamed down her face as she gripped the chain again. Ethan felt a deep ache in his chest. He didn't want to push her. She was too fragile, too scared. He needed to show her she was safe. "Okay," he said softly, forcing himself to stay calm. "You don't have to say anything more right now. First, let's get you out of here." He stood slowly, careful not to startle her. He examined the chain again. It was tied tightly, but he could undo it if he worked patiently. "I'm going to help you get free," he said, keeping his voice calm. "I won't hurt you, I promise." The girl watched him closely. Her fear didn't disappear, but something in his voice made her stop pulling away. Ethan knelt down and began working on the knot. It was rough and tight, but after several minutes, it began to loosen. The girl stayed still, as if she was holding her breath the entire time. When the chain finally fell loose, she pulled her leg away quickly, rubbing the sore skin. Ethan stepped back. "You're free now," he said softly, "but you're weak. You shouldn't walk far. I can take you to the house, give you food, clean clothes, and a warm place to rest. Only if you want to go." The girl hesitated. Her eyes darted between the shed door and Ethan. She wanted to run but didn't have the strength. More than that, she didn't know if she could trust him. Ethan stood still, waiting for her decision. Finally, slowly, she nodded. He offered his hand, not too close, not too forcefully. She stared at it for a long moment before placing her trembling hand in his. They stepped outside together. The wind brushed against them, and the open world must have felt overwhelming to the girl, after being locked away in the dark shed. She winced at the sunlight. Hiding her face, Ethan gently guided her toward Maple. The horse lowered her head curiously, sensing the girl's fragile state. Ethan lifted the girl with care and placed her in front of the saddle. She clung to the horn tightly. "It's okay," he murmured. "You're safe with me." As they rode back to the house, Ethan's thoughts swirled with confusion and worry. He had found a frightened girl chained on his land. She whispered the name of his dead wife, and none of it made sense. But one thing was clear: this girl needed help, and Ethan was the only person who could give it to her. And whether he was ready for it or not, her arrival was about to change everything he thought he knew about his quiet, lonely life. Ethan carried the girl inside his house with careful steps, as if she were made of glass. She stayed silent the entire time, holding on to him lightly, afraid to trust but too weak to stand alone. When they entered the warm living room, she looked around with wide eyes, as if she wasn't used to any place that felt safe or quiet. He guided her to the couch and helped her sit down. She kept her legs close to her chest, still shaking, still unsure. Ethan moved slowly, giving her time to understand that she was no longer trapped. "I'll bring you something to eat," he said gently. "Nothing spicy, just something soft. You need your strength." The girl didn't answer. She only watched him with those frightened eyes that seemed to hide a story too heavy for someone so small. Ethan cooked some soup, simple but warm. When he brought it to her, she hesitated before taking the bowl. She ate slowly at first, almost as if she was expecting someone to take it away. Ethan sat across the room, giving her space. As she ate, he studied her quietly. She looked around 10 or maybe 11 years old. Her face had marks of tears and fear. Her hair tangled, her skin pale. But beneath all that, there was something gentle in her eyes, something that made him feel a strange pull in his chest, a feeling he hadn't felt since Lena was alive. He didn't know why, but the girl reminded him of someone who carried a broken piece of hope. After she finished eating, she curled up on the couch, the bowl still in her hands. Ethan took it gently from her and placed it aside. "You can sleep if you want," he said softly. "You're safe here." For a moment, she stared at him, as if searching his face for the truth. Then her eyes closed slowly, and she drifted into a deep sleep. Ethan covered her with a soft blanket and sat quietly in the chair nearby. His mind was filled with questions. Why was she chained? Who left her there? And why did she whisper Lena's name? He rubbed his forehead, trying to make sense of it. But no matter how hard he tried, nothing connected. That night, he barely slept. Each time the wind moved, he checked the door to make sure no one was outside. He kept thinking someone might come looking for the girl. And if they did, they would not come with good intentions. In the morning, the girl woke up slowly, confused at first, then frightened again when she realized she wasn't in the shed. Ethan spoke gently to her. "Good morning. You're in my home now. You're safe." She nodded weakly, still unsure. Ethan gave her some clean clothes that belonged to a friend's daughter who once visited. She changed in the bathroom, taking longer than expected. When she finally came out, she looked a little less scared, though still nervous. Ethan made breakfast. She ate quietly, watching him with cautious eyes. After a while, he tried again to talk to her. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked softly. She looked down. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Then she shook her head. "That's all right," Ethan said gently. "You don't have to say anything until you're ready." She looked at him again, and for the first time, Ethan saw a tiny spark of trust appear. Later, he asked her another question. Carefully. "Yesterday, you said a name." "You whispered, Lena. Can you tell me why?" The girl trembled slightly. Her fingers twisted the edge of her shirt. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, her eyes filled with tears. Ethan raised his hand softly. "It's okay. You don't have to tell me now." She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Ethan realized she wasn't refusing, she was simply too scared to speak. Over the next few hours, Ethan cleaned a small room for her. He placed a lamp beside the bed, soft pillows, and a blanket. The room had been unused for years, but Lena once talked about turning it into a children's room. Ethan felt a strange ache in his chest as he remembered that conversation. When the girl saw the room, she looked surprised. Ethan spoke gently. "This can be your room for now. You can rest here any time." She stepped inside slowly, touching the blanket with her small fingers. Her eyes softened. For a moment, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Warmth. After settling her in, he stepped outside to think. His ranch suddenly felt different. It used to be filled only with silence and memories. Now, a frightened child was resting in a room his wife once dreamed of decorating. And she knew Lena's name. He needed answers. Ethan went into town that afternoon. He spoke with the sheriff, but without details from the girl, there wasn't much anyone could do. He also didn't want to leave her alone for too long. He bought some extra food, clothes, and a few soft toys, hoping they might help her feel safer. When he returned home, he found the girl sitting near the window, watching the horses in the field. She didn't smile, but her face looked calmer. "I got you something," Ethan said gently. He placed a soft stuffed animal in her hands. The girl touched it slowly. Her fingers curled around it, as if holding something precious. Her expression softened. A small, almost invisible smile flickered on her lips. That tiny moment gave Ethan hope. As days passed, the girl began to trust him more. She still spoke very little, but she followed him around the house, carried her toy everywhere, and sometimes even sat beside him at the table. He discovered that she liked warm milk, soft blankets, and quiet places. She jumped at loud noises but relaxed when Maple, the horse, came near her. Animals seemed to make her feel safe, but the biggest mystery remained unsolved: Lena's name. One evening, after a warm meal, the girl finally tried to speak. She sat on the couch, clutching her toy tightly, and looked at Ethan with serious eyes. I heard the name," she whispered, voice thin. "They said it." Ethan's heart pounded. "Who said it?" he asked gently. She shook her head again, unable to continue. But Ethan knew something important. Someone had spoken Lena's name to her. Someone who knew his wife. Over the next few days, Ethan tried to trace any connection. He visited old friends of Lena, people she had worked with before they married. He learned something surprising: Lena had been part of a small volunteer group years before they met. She helped people who were in tough situations. She rarely talked about it, saying those were painful memories. Ethan never asked more. He respected her silence. Now he wished he had asked. One woman told him Lena had once helped a young mother escape a dangerous situation, but she didn't know the details. She only remembered that Lena had said, "Sometimes people get trapped in places they can't escape alone." Those words echoed in Ethan's mind. Was the girl connected to someone Lena had once tried to protect? Was this unfinished part of Lena's past now reaching into the present? When Ethan returned home after gathering these pieces of information, he felt the puzzle forming, but he still didn't have all the parts. Inside the house, the girl sat waiting quietly. When she saw him, she stood up quickly, as if frightened he might leave her again. He knelt to her level and spoke gently. "I'm not going anywhere. You're safe with me." She nodded and stepped closer. Then, without warning, she whispered again. "They said, your wife helped someone." Ethan felt chills run down his spine. The girl looked up at him, tears forming in her eyes. And they said, "I must remember her name." Ethan's heart tightened, not with fear, but with a deep sense of responsibility. Whatever story this child carried, whatever danger she had escaped, whatever connection she had to his wife's past, it now lay in his hands. He knew one thing with complete certainty, something he hadn't felt clearly in years. He would protect this girl, no matter what it took. And he was finally ready to uncover the truth that Lena had left behind. The days that followed moved slowly but carefully, as if the ranch itself understood that something fragile was growing inside the small house. The girl, still silent at times, and often afraid, began to show small signs of trust. She started helping Ethan with little things, like handing him tools or placing bowls on the table. She walked a little more confidently around the house. Sometimes she even hummed softly when she thought Ethan wasn't listening. But the mystery around her stayed, quietly waiting for answers. Ethan spent many nights thinking about what she had said. "They said your wife helped someone." That one sentence filled his mind over and over. He remembered Lena as a gentle woman who always wanted to help people, even strangers. She used to say, "Kindness should not be limited to people we know." But she never told him about the deeper things she had done before they married. She kept some memories locked away, not because she wanted to hide them from Ethan, but because they hurt her heart. Now Ethan wondered if those hidden memories had something to do with the girl sitting in his living room. One evening, when the sun had just started setting behind the hills and the sky glowed with soft orange light, Ethan sat with the girl near the fireplace. The flames danced gently, creating warm shadows on the walls. The girl held her stuffed toy and looked into the fire as if trying to gather courage. Ethan waited patiently. He had learned not to rush her. "Can you tell me more?" he finally asked softly. "Only if you want to. No pressure." The girl hugged the toy tighter. Her lips trembled before she spoke, her voice barely a breath. "They lived in a place far from here. A quiet place. And they used to say your wife was kind. They said she helped people who had no one." Ethan nodded slowly. "That sounds like her," the girl continued, still whispering. "They told me she helped a woman long ago. And they talked about it sometimes. That woman had a little baby. And they said your wife kept them safe." Ethan felt his heart beat harder. He kept his voice calm. "Do you know the woman's name?" The girl shook her head. "No. They never said it. They just said your wife protected them." Ethan leaned back, letting the information settle. Lena had protected someone maybe from a difficult situation, and now, years later, a child connected to that unknown family had appeared on his land. It felt unreal, yet strangely possible. He looked at the girl again. "And you? How are you connected to all this?" She looked down. Her voice shook as she spoke. "I was with people who were always angry. They told me stories. They said I must remember your wife's name. They said she was important. They said she helped someone close to them." Her eyes filled with tears. "I heard the name so many times that when you found me, that was the name that came out." Ethan didn't press for more. He simply placed a gentle hand near hers, close enough for support, but not touching without permission. She looked at his hand for a moment, and then placed her small hand on top of his. It was the first time she reached out on her own. The simple gesture felt like sunlight breaking through a long, heavy cloud. Over the next week, Ethan focused on giving the girl a safe routine. He taught her how to help feed the animals. Maple, the horse, had grown especially gentle with her. The girl would pet her every morning, whispering things only the horse could hear. Ethan noticed how the girl looked calmer during those moments. It was as if Maple understood her pain without words. The girl also started spending more time outside. She loved watching the birds, collecting small stones, and sitting under the big oak tree near the house. Every day she grew a little stronger, her steps a little steadier, but she still avoided talking about her past. Ethan didn't push. He believed time would open the doors she had closed inside herself. One morning, while Ethan was repairing a fence, the girl stood beside him quietly. She didn't speak for a long while. Then she finally whispered, "I don't remember my parents." Ethan paused and looked at her gently. She continued, her eyes staring at the ground. "I remember voices, but not faces. I remember being scared. I remember someone telling me to be strong. And I remember the name Lena, because they kept saying it." Tears filled her eyes again, but she wiped them quickly, as if she didn't want to appear weak. Ethan placed a hand softly on her shoulder. "It's all right. You don't have to remember everything now. You're safe. You can take your time." She nodded slowly. "Thank you." Ethan felt something shift inside him, a quiet, steady feeling he hadn't felt since Lena died. It wasn't the same kind of warmth he had for his wife, but something new, a bond slowly forming with a child who had nowhere else to go. As days turned into weeks, the girl grew more comfortable. She laughed for the first time when Maple shook her head and tossed hay on Ethan's boots. The sound was soft, short, but beautiful. Ethan froze when he heard it, almost unable to believe that such a joyful sound came from the same girl he had found chained and trembling. He smiled. "That's the best sound I've heard in years." The girl looked shy, but her eyes sparkled slightly. One evening, while Ethan cooked dinner, the girl sat at the table tracing patterns on a piece of paper. It was the first time she tried drawing. At first, her lines were shaky. Then she took her time, concentrating carefully. When she finished, she turned the paper toward Ethan. It was a simple drawing, 3 figures standing in front of a house. One tall, one small, and one drawn with careful detail. A woman with long hair and a gentle smile. "This is you," she said, pointing at the tall figure. "This is me." She pointed at the small figure. Then she placed her finger on the woman. "And this is your wife. I don't know what she looked like, so I guessed." Ethan stared at the drawing, feeling his throat tighten. The woman in the picture didn't look exactly like Lena, but something in the drawing carried the same warmth Lena had. He swallowed and whispered, "It's beautiful." The girl smiled softly. "I wanted to draw us together." Ethan felt a deep ache mixed with comfort. The picture wasn't just a drawing, it was a sign. She was beginning to see herself as part of his world. As time passed, Ethan contacted a kind counselor from town, who agreed to visit the ranch quietly, helping the girl talk through her memories in gentle ways. The counselor never forced her, only guided her slowly. With time, the girl remembered small details, kindness from someone, a voice telling her to be brave, and words about hope. Ethan realized Lena's spirit was still alive through the child she once indirectly helped. One calm afternoon, the girl sat beside Ethan on the porch. The sky was wide and blue, the fields glowing under the sunlight. The wind carried the scent of warm grass. The girl looked at Ethan and spoke quietly. "Can I stay here?" Ethan felt his heart swell. He had been waiting for this moment, hoping for it but afraid to expect it. He knelt beside her. "Yes," he said gently, "for as long as you want. This is your home now." She leaned against him carefully, resting her head on his shoulder. It was the first time she had shown affection so openly. Ethan placed his arm around her, making sure she felt safe. In that moment, Ethan felt something deep and peaceful. Not the painful silence he used to live with, but a new kind of quiet one filled with healing, hope, and warmth. The ranch no longer felt empty. The rooms no longer echoed with loneliness. And for the first time since Lena passed away, Ethan felt that life still had meaning. The girl he found in chains had arrived with fear and confusion. But she brought something precious with her, a connection to his wife's kindness, a reminder of the good Lena had done in the world, and a chance for Ethan to begin again. And Ethan knew one truth very clearly now. Lena had protected someone years ago, and today, Ethan was protecting the child who carried that legacy forward. Together, they stepped into a future shaped not by fear or loneliness, but by quiet strength, new beginnings, and the love that remained both from the past and the present.